Alright, this presentation is about different ways of motivating employees. When we're talking about motivating employees, what we're really talking about is how do we get employees to work better, faster, harder, all while their morale is high. We're not really talking about how to threaten them into doing things. It's more about how do we get more out of employees that we have. In some ways that's a money-saving issue where we'd like to not have to hire more employees, but also people when they're working hard, when they're seeing the results of their labors, they're happier, they will do better work, they have more ideas, things just get better. So we want that, but how do we get there is the question. There are some historical perspectives on all this stuff. The classical theory is that money is the sole motivator for workers. That's an interesting way to put it. For college students, that might work. It worked for me when I was a college student. You want to pay me money to do something? I'm happy. But it gets old. It runs out of its usefulness very quickly. Some early people who worked on this, though, there's Frederick Taylor and then there's Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. Frank and Lillian were a lot more interesting characters. If you read the book, don't watch the most recent movie that came out about it, but read the book, Cheaper by the Dozen. It's all about their life. They've got 12 kids, and they're all about efficiency. Frank is one they talk about more often, although Lillian did perfectly well after his death, but very much into efficiency of process. For example, he went to work as a bricklayer at one point, and on his first day, he came in for lunch and told his boss, hey, there's a more efficient way to do this. And his boss laughed at him and said, you've been laying brick for like 3 hours, and here you come and say you want to revolutionize the entire process. Fine, well, what's your idea? And he said, you need to give me a table to put the bricks on. The boss said, what are you talking about? He said, well, think about it. I'm laying bricks. After the first couple of rows, I have to bend down and pick up a brick. And we're going up a few feet here. Every time I have to bend down, pick up a brick, and come back up to set it on the wall, it takes me time. If you compile all of those seconds I take bending down, picking it up, not to mention the exhaustion factor, you're wasting a lot of time, a lot of energy. You could be a lot more efficient by giving me something to raise up the bricks. Well, okay, yeah, that works. Now, we like stuff like that. We're making the process more efficient. We're making it work better. The problem they have with this classical theory of motivation is that you tend to end up looking at employees as robots. So, to improve productivity, we should break down each job, determine the best way to perform each job, and then specify the output to be achieved. So we're going to look at it and say, here are the steps. If you do those, you should be able to finish this many in this amount of time, and this is your job. Here we go. Think of an assembly line. Done. Then to incentivize, we'll link workers' pay directly to their output. You want to make more money? Fine. Make more widgets, make more sprockets, make more whatever. The problem with that is you tend to dehumanize in the upper levels of this. You get a lot of stuff out of it at the very beginning, but then it starts to dehumanize pretty quickly. All right, the Hawthorne studies. They came in thinking that physical conditions in the workplace would stimulate productivity. So there was something about the human being that wasn't just a machine. Let's go and figure out what this is. I don't think they expected the results that they got. They would try things like what would happen if we amped up the lights, make the lights brighter, give everyone more light. What's going to happen to productivity? Well, productivity went up. Ooh, we're onto something here. Let's try lowering them next, just to prove that we're geniuses. So we're going to lower the lights. What do you think happened? Productivity went up again. Suddenly we have a confusion. Okay. So what they figured out in the end is that social and psychological factors could affect productivity and morale. We weren't just robots. We were now people. And when we did things, if the employees believed we were doing it for them, that we're being sensitive to them, that was something that would make them work harder and make them happier. So that's an interesting concept, and that leads us into some other ideas. So, leaving behind some of the historical, but using some of their concepts, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Here we are saying that people have 5 sets of needs. Okay, and for simplicity's sake, imagine that each one of these, you have to kind of complete this one before you move on, like some type of video game. Okay? Now, your physiological needs are your food, water, shelter. Sometimes people toss in, other physical needs having to do with companionship, things like that. Here's where, if you have someone who is literally starving or is worried about their rent being due next week, we'll do all kinds of things for more money. If you want to offer them more money to work harder, they'll do it for you because they need that money. That's a physiological need. However, once you are done with that, they have a roof over their head, they're fairly secure financially, then we move on. Security needs, a couple different levels to this one. The first one is, do they think they can make it home without dying? People in a war zone, for example, do not work very well. They're rather distracted, and justifiably so. The other part would be your work security, your job security. People who are really worried about being fired don't really actually work that well. Some people think they do, but they don't. Now, social needs. Once you're fairly secure in your job and you aren't worried about starving to death, your apartment or house is not going to be foreclosed on or evicted from, then we start wondering if we like the people that we work with. A lot of people lose a job because they didn't like the people they worked with. That's a social need. We want to work with people that we enjoy being around. Okay? That's a social need. Esteem needs. How good am I? I mean, what about my ego? What about I'm the best in my department? I'm the worst in my department. What about that? What about the competition? What about the drive, the ambition? Things like that. Here we're talking about advancement and promotions and prizes for contests, things like that. Now, self-actualization. This is, am I being my best self? Have I really, conquered what I should be conquering? You see this a lot with actresses and actors. When you start talking about somebody who has done pretty much everything that they could do, every role that they wanted to have, they've had, and they're now doing things to stretch themselves. Okay, think of it like Denzel Washington. There was something a few years back, I think it was with the movie Flight, that he finally did like a full frontal nudity scene, which not sure if we should be congratulating Mr. Washington on such a thing, but that was something to stretch himself as an actor, that he hadn't done that before, and so he was going to stretch himself and try and find, new roles and new ways to, and just stuff like that. It's whether or not they're being challenged, really, is what it comes down to, because they now know how good they are thanks to this esteem needs being met, and they want to see how far they can push the envelope. Now, every level has a different way you can motivate people. How would you motivate somebody down here that's still worried about starving to death? Well, you can pay them. It's very simple. Security needs, either you have to work on the security in your factory or your office building if there's really a safety threat, or you work on job security. Give them some ways to realize how well they are doing when they're at work. Social needs, company parties are directly pointed at social needs. Making sure that they have a friend, that their cubicle is not next to the annoying guy. That they have someone to talk to. Here's where being a little buddy-buddy with your employees helps, because you're their friend as well as their boss. Sometimes you cannot be both. Don't think you can. Esteem needs, competitions are the way we usually address that one. Self-actualization, we start talking about projects. That, there's something I want you to do because you've got the skills for it, but you know what, it's going to be a tough project. And you go, oh, a challenge, I'll take it. Okay? Different ways of doing it. However, if you were to offer more money to the self-actualization person, how well is that going to go? Not that well, because they've already filled that need. Why are we still talking about it? Now, another way of looking at it. Hertzberg's two-factor theory. This is a fun one. It's one of those I go to all the time, especially since you can actually apply this to a marriage or a relationship. I'll explain why. Basically, he said that there are hygiene factors and there are motivational factors. The hygiene factors are things that are expected. We expect to have them. When they're there, we give you the same productivity we've always done. And if they're not there, we're going to give you less. Motivational factors, on the other hand, are not things we really expect, but if you'll give them to us, we'll work harder for them, and your productivity goes up. So, for example, hygiene factors, adequate wages. So, if they're there, fine. If they're not there, we're unhappy. Comfortable and safe working conditions. When's the last time you showed up to work and said, "Ooh, the AC is on, I'm going to work harder today"? No, we'll just work our regular pace because the AC is on. If the AC is off and not working and we're really hot at work, we're going to work less because we're going to spend our time complaining. Fair company policies, job security. Okay, things that we expect to be there. Motivational factors, achievement, recognition, involvement, responsibility, advancement, being in the know, being in the circle, being any of those things. Those are motivational factors. Okay, we don't expect them to be there, but if they are, that's going to motivate us. Now, how it works with the relationship, there are things that are expected in a relationship. They're just going to happen. And there are things you can do to get brownie points. My wife, for example, me going to work, hygiene factor. Just something that I do. That's fine. A motivational factor, how I get brownie points, I do dishes. It's not expected, but if I do dishes, then she's happier with me. It's very simple. Now, Theory X and Theory Y. Talking about what we expect or what we think of our employees. Theory X, think negative. X, big negative. We assume that our average person dislikes work. They must be coerced, controlled, directed, threatened with punishments. Sheep. Reluctant. Lazy. Sheep. Theory Y, on the other hand, people exercise self-direction, self-control, they'll commit to objectives, they'll accept and seek responsibility, all bunch of positive things. Now, why does this make a difference? Why do we care? Well, because if we believe Theory X, we will treat people as if they were Theory X. What do you think they're going to give you if you expect Theory X from them? Well, they will show you those behaviors, and you'll always be saying, see how lazy they are. If you expect Theory Y and you communicate that to people, what are they going to give you? Theory Y. It's the difference between yelling and screaming at people and saying how lazy they are and saying, you guys are awesome. Okay? There have been times when either one would work, but be very careful because generally people will give you what you expect of them and what you communicate in your expectations. Equity theory. A very dangerous one. Remember, equity, this is saying that we expect things to be fair and equitable. However, equity is a subjective notion. So, for example, here's something that could be bad. Usually this one is a negative one, actually. Let's say that I happen to find out that one of my coworkers makes more money than I do. And I start to look at it and say, well, she doesn't do this, or that. She leaves early, and yet she gets paid more. So, I'm going to do one of two things. One is positive, which is I would come to my boss and say, I would like to make more money by figuring out how I could be a better employee. That's the positive. The negative is you have somebody who goes and says, fine, if they're not going to pay me, then I'm going to work a little bit less hard today and make it all fair. Or I'm going to start stealing stuff. Today it's paper clips, tomorrow it's actual money. I don't have to do that. They don't pay me enough for that. And suddenly your entire morale is gone based on this theory of equity. Be very careful about that one. Expectancy theory basically says that if I believe that there's a reward that's worth it, and I can actually get it, I will work harder. Now, again, this is something that if everything's working well, you'll never think of it. If things start to go poorly, however, things can tumble out of control rather quickly. For example, if you believe, I had a company one time, for example, that I was working for them. They talked about all the advancement that I could get into, and oh, that's great. So I'm expecting something now, something in the future. I could become whatever. What happens when that belief goes away? When you're told, oh, never mind. I can tell you from experience, you have a real morale problem all of a sudden because the expectancy theory has been violated. And if you suddenly believe that there is no benefit to what you're doing, suddenly you're not working as hard, are you? That is the end of this presentation. Hope you've enjoyed it, and good luck on this week's assignments.